So we've talked about how the urinary system uses GFR to help maintain ion concentration, water volume, blood volume, things like that. The kidneys do a couple of other things, and we're going to talk about that in this video. So we've got these three. So the first additional activity that we're going to talk about is how the kidney affects vitamin D and calcitriol. Okay. Normally, these are inactive. However, once they get to the liver or the kidneys, these compounds become active. So basically what happens, vitamin D is inactive, but it reaches the kidneys and it's converted to calcitriol. Okay, so what does calcitriol do? It stimulates the absorption of calcium in the intestine. So basically we're taking calcium and ultimately getting it into the bloodstream, okay, where we can use that calcium. It's nice to have calcium in the small intestine, but if it just stays there, it'll eventually be excreted out. And so that doesn't do us any good. Calcitriol also causes us to absorb both phosphate and magnesium. So I'm just mentioning that so you know that they do that, but that's not what we're going to focus on here. Okay, next we've got parathyroid hormone. Now, as we've mentioned previously, we mentioned that parathyroid hormone exists. Parathyroid hormone comes from the parathyroid gland. Okay, ultimately what it does is it causes release of calcium from the bone into the bloodstream. Okay, so you can see here if we've got low blood calcium, parathyroid gland releases parathyroid hormone. And what happens is you've got these cells in your bone called osteoclasts, and osteoclasts break down bone. And that one of the things that happens as a result is that calcium is released into the bloodstream. This also allows the kidneys to reabsorb calcium into the bloodstream. So parathyroid causes osteoclasts to produce or to break down bone so we have more calcium. It also causes, parathyroid hormone also causes kidneys to reabsorb calcium that's in the filtrate back into the bloodstream. And then the last thing is it also helps increase calcium absorption from the small intestine into the bloodstream. So parathyroid hormone helps with that calcium or helps increase blood calcium 3 different ways. All right. It also does cause release of phosphate from bone into the bloodstream. So this is similar to calcium. But what's really interesting is that it causes calcium, it causes the kidneys to excrete, and that's probably not the best term here, but basically what's happening is that the kidneys are reabsorbing phosphate from the filtrate back into the bloodstream. And then finally, we're going to end here on this short video with the process of erythropoiesis. And so erythropoiesis is the creation of new red blood cells. Okay, I've got a picture here that you may or may not know who this is. This is Lance Armstrong, who was a very famous cycler, very good cycler, and then we all found out he cheated and just everybody's world came crashing down. Well, what he did to help him win is that he did this artificially. Okay, he took synthetic erythropoietin. Okay, erythropoietin is the hormone that your kidneys release that stimulates the creation of new red blood cells. Lance Armstrong took a synthetic version to create new red blood cells so that he could carry more oxygen as he's riding his bike up and down the Alps. Okay, like I mentioned, EPO is produced in the kidneys. So the stimulus for the release of EPO is hypoxemia, or in other words, low blood oxygen. Okay, as a result, this will cause more red blood cells to be produced over the next couple of weeks. And as a result, you have a greater hemoglobin concentration. And as we talked about during the cardiovascular section, hemoglobin is where most of our oxygen is carried. So if you've got more hemoglobin, you can carry more oxygen. And when it comes to exercise, if you've got more oxygen in your body, specifically carried by the hemoglobin, you're going to be able to exercise longer. Okay. There's a story about how Lance Armstrong getting caught cheated ended up indirectly affected me coming to IU. But we can get into that at another time. All right, so at the end of this, can you define erythropoiesis and explain the role of the kidney in this process? Can you explain how parathyroid hormone affects calcium and phosphate concentrations? But admittedly, I'll focus mostly on calcium, and I don't have it up here, but just talk about how the kidneys and vitamin D are related.